So I also have in the past been an Australian sailing dinghy instructor and powerboat instructor. I'm a qualified race officer with Australian Sailing, an instructor for coxswain near coastal grade 1, marine radio instructor, and I'm exploring the possibility of running a marine radio course for you guys as well. I've done a fair bit of racing experience over the years, all of which, apart from the first 4, have been representing this club, including at national championships, and the highlight of my sailing career, so this is where you're going to put all this into its perspective. I placed 5th in the Mum 30 national championships, but that's surpassed by the fact that my band came 4th in the Triple J Worst Band in Australia competition. So I'm better at being a bad musician than I am at being a sailor. So it's just put everything into perspective. So this is a session for our adult keelboat sailors, some of whom are new to the sport, some of whom are returning to the sport, some of whom have been involved in the sport for a long time, but need to brush up on the rules because the rules have changed. So it could be a little bit of a old dog, new tricks situation. We acknowledge that the people here in the room have different levels of understanding of the racing rules of sailing. Some have probably very little understanding, some have quite a lot of understanding. But some of us have been sailing for so long, like for example, when there's concepts like master beam and having to round a mark again if you hit it, that we need to be aware that the rules have changed. So some of us old dogs might have to learn some new tricks, and C6 Steve has got a bit to say about that. I found that the other day, so I thought that was quite appropriate. Okay, so many of us, who's got a powerboat licence here? Okay, so most of us have got powerboat licences. So at the least we should be familiar with the navigation rules administered by Marine and Safety Tasmania, and which are based upon the Convention for the International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea, better known as the coal regs. Interesting from this is the MAST homepage. They get them the name wrong. They call it the Rules for Preventing Collision at Sea, and the link doesn't work. So if you want to find the full details of the coal regs, search for them. They're very boring reading. But what they're essentially aimed at is keeping vessels apart. So make sure that there's no collisions. But in yacht racing, we have lots of situations where boats need to come close together. So because of that, the World Sailing Authority has developed what we call the Racing Rules of Sailing. When we're actually racing, these rules take precedent over the coal regs, unless we come across a boat that's not racing. Okay, so be mindful of that when we're out sailing here on this harbour here. We've got commercial vessels, some of which have got pilot exemption, which means that power doesn't have to give way to sail. So just be mindful of that. But when we're actually racing, we're using the racing rules of sailing. They're the things that apply to us. Okay, so in Australia, our national body, Australian Sailing, administers the racing rules of sailing. It used to be called the Blue Book, but now it's available online on the web page, and such that you can actually Google these racing rules whilst you're out there sailing. In addition to the racing rules of sailing, Australian Sailing has got some introductory rules which are generally used for learners, like kids when they're learning to sail. But for us mainly it is what's called the Blue Book, the Racing Rules of Sailing. Physically you used to actually have a copy of this book on your boat. Now you just have to have access to it. So if you've got a phone, you've got access to the rules. Okay, so this is the content of the Racing Rules of Sailing, and you can see that most of it is actually made up of appendixes for various different specific types of racing. So we're not going to be covering off on those ones, but what we are going to be covering off on are the basic principles that undermine all of the rules, the fundamental rules that apply across the board, some of the rules in part 2 for right of way in terms of who gives way, mark rounding and avoiding collisions we're going to be covering off today. We're not comprehensively covering off the whole thing. We're going to cover off some of the rules in part 3 around conduct of a race in terms of starting and rules around hitting a mark. And in part 4 we're going to cover off the penalty turns concept. And very briefly, we're going to cover a bit of part 5 in terms of protests. Okay, so these are the basic principles. And you note it says the basic principles shall not be changed because there is scope to change some of these rules. Okay, but for all intents and purposes, we won't be changing any of the rules except maybe the scoring rule where you've got flexibility to change it. The first basic principle is sportsmanship. So saying that we are governed by a body of rules we are expected to follow, but also we're expected to enforce. We don't have umpires out on the water. It's a self-regulating sport. So if you see someone doing the wrong thing, you have an obligation to advise them that they're doing the wrong thing, as much as you have an obligation to do the right thing yourself, which is where it's a little bit different to other sports. Now, at top levels of sailing, you will have umpires on the water, things like Sail GP, some of the Olympic events and things like that. But for most of yacht racing, it's self-enforcing. And the second basic principle is environmental responsibility. This one's only come in the last 10 or so years. Back when I started sailing, with big keel boats would hoist their spinnakers up and they'd be tied up with little bits of wool to stop the spinnaker filling before it got to the top. Under this rule, we're not allowed to do that anymore because of the impact on the ocean of little bits of wool. But seriously, we do need to make sure we look after our environment. So they're the basic principles. And now there's 4 fundamental rules. The first one is around safety, which means that all of us here, whether we are a skipper of a boat or a person on the crew of a boat, we have an obligation to give all possible help to any person or vessel in danger. We saw that the other week when James went on the rocks and Matt pulled out of the race. Was someone else did as well?
Yeah,
Max.
He's already over the line, so he'd already won.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Yeah, so that's really good to see. We're actually complying with that fundamental bit about safety. The other thing is about safety equipment. So the boat should carry adequate life safety equipment for all people, including an item ready for immediate use. Now on most boats that is a life ring or something like that you can throw to someone in the water. But for us, if we're sailing the boats like the trailer sailors and things like that, it encompasses the PFD that the crews are wearing. So if all your crews are wearing PFDs on a boat like the SB20, you don't have to have a separate life ring. But if your people on your boat are not wearing PFDs, you do have to have a separate life ring. And if your boat's big enough to have one, it's a good advice to carry one. Okay, so the next one is fair sailing. So we will compete with our principles of sportsmanship. And if we breach the sportsmanship rule, we can be penalised, and that could be a disqualification. The next one is one that you might not be aware of. It's called the decision to race. Now, whereas our club, Port Esperance Sailing Club, is the organising authority for our races, the club is not telling you that you have to go out there and race. So if you believe that the conditions are not right for you, okay, so it is your decision as a crew member whether you're going to go on someone's boat or as a skipper whether you're going to enter the race. It's not the responsibility of the club. Now, of course, the club exercises care and responsibility, and if it's blowing 35 knots out there on the bay, we will probably not start the race, okay, because it would not be safe. But I've raced in 50 knots. So if you start the Sydney Hobart yacht race and you're halfway down the coast, the Cruising Yacht Club of Australia can't call the race off. And the last fundamental rule is acceptance of the rules. So when you sign up to participate in a race, you're saying that I accept the racing rules and they will be enforced and I will be governed by the rules. Okay, so there's the fundamentals. All right, so the next slide is a little video. There's a number of these videos. Now, some of them have got numbers. The numbers do not relate to the rules. So the first one definition is port, starboard, windward and leeward. Okay, so if the wind is coming over your left-hand side of the boat, you are said to be on port tack. If the wind is coming over the right-hand side of your boat, you are said to be on starboard tack. If you are closer to the wind, you are said to be windward. If you are further away from the wind, you are said to be leeward. All right, so the first rule we're going to look at is the rules are around when boats meet. And the first one is when boats are on opposite tacks. Now, when boats are on opposite tacks, the boat that has the wind over its right-hand side or on starboard has right of way. And the boat that's got the wind on the port side has to give way. And in crossing situations such as that, you can choose to duck down below. You can also choose to tack in front. We'll worry about that later on. Now, this is the fundamental rule in that it doesn't matter if you are windward or leeward or whatever. If you're on starboard, you have right of way. Okay? If you're on port, you have to give way. So there may be a boat coming down under spinnaker really fast. If it's got the wind on its right-hand side and you're going slowly up towards with the wind on your left-hand side, you have to give way to that starboard boat. All right, so the next rule is what happens if the boats are on the same tack, both on port or both on starboard. If you are on leeward, you have right of way over the boat that is to windward. So the leeward boat can... So the blue boat's got right of way, and the blue boat can force the yellow boat to keep up. Okay? And you gain right of way when you get what's called an overlap. When the first bit of your boat overlaps the other bit. Now, 100 years ago, or when I started sailing, and even before that, when Doug started sailing, you actually had to be completely aligned, which was cool. But now, as long as you've got the tip of your bow overlaps, then you can force this boat to keep up. And this boat has to get out of your way.
So the tip of the bow, not a bowsprit though?
Yeah, bowsprit. Yep. So if I wanted to be a pain in the arse, I would pull the bowsprit right out so that I could get an overlap.
Carry an extra one.
But that's possibly in breach of that sportsmanship thing. It's sort of like, if I had no reason to put my bowsprit out, like I'm going to windward, I probably shouldn't do it. If I'm heading downwind and I've got the spinnaker up and the bowsprit's out, absolutely, the bowsprit is the first bit. Yep.
Steve,
Yeah.
maybe just mention what you've got to shout out when you're in these situations.
You don't have to say anything.
Eh?
You don't have to say anything. That's a myth.
So we're going along and this one's coming up.
Okay. So Marty raises a good point. Okay.
Yeah?
There's a common assumption that you have to, if you've got right of way, that you have to tell the other boat that you've got right of way. That's not written anywhere in the rules. So sometimes, once on the start line when I was sailing on Magnolia and Alieska was coming up, I'm just going up like that, just pointing like this, basically telling him he's got to keep up, but I don't have to say a thing. Okay? He's supposed to know that he's supposed to, if he's a windward boat, he's supposed to keep clear.
I don't think so.
Same as on port and starboard, you'll hear people say, starboard! And they think they have to say starboard. They don't have to say it. Okay, if you're on starboard, you have right of way.
That's more to avoid a collision.
It's more to avoid a collision. It's sort of like, I'm not sure that this boat's going to keep out of my way, so I'm going to remind him, yeah, you can make that choice, but the thing is that you don't have to make that choice. And that's the question that Marty said.
In doubt, shout.
If in doubt, shout. When in doubt, shout.